You have 7 days to find a husband, or the court seizes every acre your husband died protecting." Judge Harrison's words hit Clara Whitmore like a fist to the chest, right there in front of the entire town of Red Valley. 3 days. Her husband had been in the ground for only 3 days, and they were already deciding who would take his place. Not as sheriff, as her owner. She pressed her fingernails into her palms to keep from screaming. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of them. If you've ever been backed into a corner, you didn't deserve this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel. Follow Clara's journey until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Judge Harrison read the ruling out loud, Clara Whitmore was still wearing black. The dress was wool, and it was too warm for June, but she hadn't changed since the burial. She hadn't slept either. She had spent the last 3 nights sitting in the chair by the window that William used to sit in, the one that faced east, the one where he'd drink his coffee before sunrise and watch the light come up over the ridge. She sat in his chair because it still smelled like him tobacco and pine soap, and something warmer underneath that she could never name. She had been trying to memorize that smell, because she understood even then that it would not last. The courthouse in Red Valley was not a grand building. It was a single room with plank floors and a low ceiling that collected heat like a pot with a lid on it, and by the time Clara arrived that morning, the benches were already full. Not because the people of Red Valley were concerned about justice. They were there because it was the most interesting thing to happen since William Whitmore took a bullet in the chest trying to stop a robbery at the grain depot 6 nights ago. Clara had been the one to find him. She hadn't talked about that part to anyone. She walked to the front of the room and sat down in the chair that had been left for her directly in front of the judge's table. And she kept her spine straight and her hands folded and her face completely still. She had learned that skill early, the skill of stillness when everything inside you is coming apart. William used to call it her armor. She wore it now. Judge Harrison came in from the side door and the room went quiet fast, the way rooms go quiet when authority enters. He was a stout man, with white side whiskers and small eyes that didn't miss much, and he carried a leather binder under one arm like it contained the fate of the world, which for Clara Whitmore, it did. He set the binder on the table without looking at her. He opened it. He read, under Montana Territorial Code Section 41 subsection C, a widow who holds property deeded solely in her late husband's name, and who has no living male relative within the territory, must either transfer title of said property to a recognized male guardian or enter into legal marriage within a period of no less than 7 days from the date of her husband's passing. He paused. The room did not make a sound. Clara's hands tightened in her lap, but her face did not move. In the case of Clara Ann Whitmore, widow of Sheriff William James Whitmore, deceased, this court finds that the above conditions apply. Harrison looked up for the first time. He looked directly at her. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have 7 days to remarry, or surrender the ranch." And then the room erupted, not in outrage, in conversation. People turned to each other and started talking the way people do when something happens that interests them, when someone else's tragedy becomes the event of the week. Clara heard fragments of it all around her. Well, she can't run that place alone. William would have wanted someone to look after her. What about the Henderson boy? He's looking for a wife. No, she's too much trouble. That one always has opinions. Clara stood. She didn't plan to speak. She had told herself she would stay quiet, that she would hear the ruling, and then go home and figure out what to do. But something happened when she stood up. Something she couldn't explain, and the words came out before she could stop them. "I have managed that ranch beside my husband for 8 years. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I know every acre of that land. I know every horse by name, every contract in the filing cabinet, every rotation of the cattle routes. I have kept the books, repaired fences, negotiated with buyers, and trained 3 ranch hands. I have done all of that while also raising a household. So I would like someone in this room to tell me clearly and out loud exactly what it is they think I cannot do." The room went very quiet again. Harrison looked at her over the top of his binder. Mrs. Whitmore. I am not finished. She turned slowly, letting her eyes move across the benches, across the faces of the people she had cooked meals for, and nursed through fever, and stood beside at funerals. My husband gave his life protecting this town, and the thanks this town gives his widow is a 7-day countdown to either give away everything he built or hand herself over to a man she doesn't know. She sat back down. Her hands were trembling now, but she kept them in her lap where no one could see. Harrison cleared his throat. The law is the law, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't write it, I apply it. I understand. She kept her voice even. Who did the court have in mind? It was the wrong question. Or maybe it was the exactly right one, because the look that passed between Harrison and the man sitting in the far left corner of the room told Clara everything she needed to know before a single word was spoken. The man in the corner was Nathan Cole. He was 45 years old, and he owned more land in the valley than any other single person, and he had been buying up smaller properties for the past 4 years in a pattern that looked, if you knew where to look, very much like a man building walls around something he wanted. Clara had noticed it 2 years ago. William had noticed it the year before that. 2 weeks before the shooting at the grain depot, William had told her he thought Nathan was behind the recent pressure on the smaller ranchers, the fence cuttings, the mysteriously spooked cattle, the fires that happened to break out in barns belonging to men who had refused to sell. I can't prove it yet, he'd said, but I will. He never got the chance. Nathan Cole caught her looking at him and smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind that told you the other person already knew how the game was going to end. Clara looked away. The court, Harrison said carefully, has identified a candidate who has agreed to take legal responsibility for the Whitmore property. A man of suitable age and established residency. His name, Clara said. Harrison shuffled papers. Caleb Dawson. The room reacted like someone had dropped something heavy on the floor. People sat up straighter. A few laughed outright, quickly smothered, but not before Clara heard them. She heard someone behind her whisper the broken cowboy, and someone else respond, "What a miserable match." She didn't know the name, not well. She had heard it the way you hear names in small towns in passing, in warnings and stories that grew in the telling. Caleb Dawson was the man who lived alone in the eastern section of the valley on a patch of land that nobody else had wanted. He had come to Red Valley 4 years ago and had never once given anyone a reason to like him or a reason to fear him. He simply existed at the edges of things, which somehow made people more nervous than if he'd given them something specific to point to. She had seen him once, maybe twice. She could not have told you the color of his eyes. "Bring him in," Harrison said. The door at the back of the room opened and Caleb Dawson walked in. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she hadn't registered it the one time she'd seen him before. He moved the way men move when they've spent most of their lives outdoors, with an economy of motion that had nothing to do with grace and everything to do with habit. He was wearing clean clothes, which told her he'd made some effort, and he had the look of a man who had made no effort to look like he'd made an effort, which she found against her will slightly interesting. His hands were scarred. She noticed that first before she noticed his face. The kind of scars that don't come from a single accident, but from years of accumulated work and small disasters. His face was sun-weathered and hard to read, and his eyes, she could see now that they were dark brown, almost black, moved across the room without emotion until they found her. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at Harrison. "I'm here," he said. "Not as a greeting, just as information." Harrison gestured to the chair beside Clara. Caleb crossed the room and sat in it. He didn't look at her again. He sat with his forearms resting on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and Clara studied the side of his face and tried to figure out what was happening. Why would this man agree to this? What did he want? "Mr. Dawson has agreed to the arrangement under the terms outlined in the court's proposal," Harrison said. "A legal marriage with full property rights remaining in trust under both names to be reviewed at the end of 1 calendar year." "Reviewed how?" Clara asked. "If both parties are in agreement, the marriage continues. If either party wishes to dissolve it, the property will be divided according to contribution." She looked at Caleb. "And you agreed to this?" He turned to look at her. Up close, there was something in his face that she hadn't expected, not coldness exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that had been quiet for a very long time. "I agreed," he said. "Why?" A pause. He seemed to consider whether to answer honestly or give her the easy version. He chose honest. Because it was this or Nathan Cole. The room buzzed. Nathan in his corner went very still. "You know him?" Clara asked carefully. "I know his type." Caleb held her gaze. "I know what men like him do to things they want to own." She stared at him for a long moment. She didn't know whether to trust him. She didn't know whether she trusted anyone in this room. But she recognized something in what he'd said, a directness she hadn't expected, a clarity that cut through the noise of everything else happening around her. "All right," she said. She turned back to the judge. "When does this have to happen?" "The court requires the ceremony within 48 hours. She pressed her lips together. She nodded once. "Fine." The wedding took place 2 days later in the same courthouse, with Harrison officiating and exactly 3 people in attendance. Tom Briggs, who was the court recorder, and 2 women from town who came because weddings in Red Valley, even reluctant ones, were still events. Clara wore a gray dress, not the black one, because even in her grief, she had enough self-possession to recognize that black at your own wedding was a step too far. Caleb wore the same clean clothes he'd worn to the hearing, plus a coat that fit him well enough to suggest it might actually be his. They stood side by side. They did not touch until they had to. Harrison read the words quickly, which Clara was grateful for. "When it came time for the part where you agreed to love and cherish until death." She kept her voice flat and her eyes forward, and she heard Caleb say the same words beside her, in a voice that was not flat. It was careful, which was different, and somehow harder to listen to. When it was over, Harrison signed the paper and handed it to her. She folded it and put it in her pocket. Outside, the street was quiet. It was mid-morning, and most people were at work, and the few who saw them come out of the courthouse looked quickly and looked away. She heard one woman say something to the person beside her, and she heard the word shame, and she could not tell if it was directed at the situation or at her or at Caleb. She didn't ask. She walked to where her horse was tied. She untied it, and then she turned to find Caleb standing a few feet away waiting. "My ranch is east," she said. 20 minutes on the main road." "I know where it is." She looked at him. "Of course you do." She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up. "You can follow me or find your own way. Either works." He found his own horse, a solid gray gelding tied farther down the post, and he followed her. The Whitmore Ranch was 240 acres of river-bottom land that William had homesteaded 11 years earlier before Clara had arrived, and then built up steadily across the years they were together. It was not the biggest property in the valley, but it was one of the most efficiently run, and anyone who knew cattle knew that the Whitmore operation was organized in a way that most ranchers twice the size couldn't match. Clara had built that organization. She hadn't always gotten credit for it. She rode into the yard and dismounted before Caleb had fully stopped, and she turned to face him before he could say anything. "Here are my conditions," she said. He looked at her. "All right. The ranch is mine. The land is mine. The workers answer to me. I make the decisions." She kept her voice even. "You are here because the law requires it. But inside those 240 acres, the law is secondary to function. If you have ideas, you can share them. If I agree they're good, we'll use them. If I don't, we won't." Caleb looked around the yard. He looked at the barn, the bunkhouse, the main house with its porch and its 2 chimneys. Then he looked back at her. "That works for me." She blinked. She had expected pushback. She had prepared 3 responses to 3 different forms of argument. The simple agreement left her with nothing to say. "You're not going to argue?" she asked. "You know this land. I don't." He dismounted. It would be stupid to argue. She stared at him for another moment. Then she turned toward the house. "There's a second bedroom at the end of the hall. It has a cot and a window that faces north. The workers eat at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. If you want coffee, it's on the stove by 5. I'll manage. I'm sure you will. She stopped at the porch steps and looked back at him one more time. Mr. Dawson, I don't know why you really agreed to this. I don't know what you want, but I want you to understand something. He waited. I will figure it out, she said. I always do. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. Something that appeared and was gone before she could be sure of it. I believe you, he said. She went inside. 3 hours later, Clara was in the office going through the ranch ledgers when she heard shouting from the yard. She came out of the house to find 2 of her ranch hands, Eli, who was 19 and quick-tempered, and Hector, who was 30, and usually steadier, standing in a standoff with a man she recognized as Denny Cross, one of Nathan Cole's hired men. Cross was built wide across the shoulders and had a way of planting his feet when he talked to people that was designed to make them feel smaller. He had 2 other men behind him also from Nathan's operation. Got a message from Mr. Cole, Cross was saying. He says the access road through the south pasture's being closed. It crosses coal land by about 40 feet, and Mr. Cole figures now's as good a time as any to enforce his right to close it. Eli had his fists at his sides. That road's been there for 9 years. That right? Then it's been there on Mr. Cole's generosity for 9 years, and Mr. Cole's generosity has run out. Clara came down the porch steps. Mr. Cross. The 3 men looked at her. That road, she said, walking toward them, was established by a right-of-way agreement signed by Nathan Cole's predecessor when this ranch was established. I have the original document in my office. The right-of-way does not expire. Cross looked at her with the practiced patience of a man who had been sent to do something unpleasant and had decided to enjoy it. Mrs. Whitmore, or I guess it's Mrs. Dawson now, my condolences on your situation. The document, she said again, is legally binding. If Nathan wants to contest it, he can take it to the court. Until then, that road stays open. Mr. Cole thought you might say something like that. Cross tilted his head slightly. He also asked me to remind you that you've got a lot of fence line that borders Cole property, and fence line is a lot of territory to keep watch over all by yourself. It was a threat, clear enough but shapeless enough to deny. Clara opened her mouth. A voice came from behind her. She's not by herself. Caleb Dawson came down the porch steps and walked past Clara and stopped about 6 feet from Cross. He wasn't doing anything threatening. His hands weren't even near his belt. He simply stood there, the way he'd stood in the courthouse, with that quality of absolute stillness that Clara was beginning to realize was not coldness, but something else entirely. Something that had been tested and refined by a great deal of experience. Cross looked at him. Something shifted in his expression, not fear, but recalculation. Dawson, he said. Cross. Caleb glanced at the 2 men behind him, then back. The message is delivered. You can go. A long pause. Cross looked from Caleb to Clara and back, and Clara watched him decide whether this was worth escalating. She watched him decide it wasn't. Not today. We'll be in touch, Cross said. He turned and walked back to his horse. The 2 men followed. Clara watched them go until they were through the gate and onto the main road. Then she turned to Caleb. I had it handled, she said. I know you did. He looked at her. But 3 against 1 is 3 against 1. She studied him for a moment. You know Nathan Cole's man. I've seen him. Where? Caleb was quiet for the second. 2 years ago, before I came here, I was in Billings. There was a rancher there named August Freed who had land Nathan Cole wanted. Cross showed up to have a conversation similar to the one he just had with you. He paused. August Freed sold his land 6 weeks later. Clara felt something go cold in her chest. And what happened to August Freed? Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. Nobody knows. He left town after he signed the papers, and nobody heard from him after that. The yard was quiet. Eli and Hector had gone, still listening. Clara looked at the gate where Cross's dust was still settling. "He's been planning this," she said quietly. "Nathan Cole has been planning this." Caleb said nothing. William knew. She heard her own voice go flat. "He told me he thought Nathan was behind the pressure on the smaller ranchers. But neither of us thought—" She stopped. She thought about the grain depot, the robbery, the shot that had come from somewhere the thief shouldn't have been. A shot that had found William and no one else. She turned back to Caleb and looked at him directly. "I need you to tell me something honestly. All right? Did you come here because you knew what Nathan Cole was doing?" He held her gaze for a long time, long enough that she knew he was considering exactly how much to say. "I came here," he said finally, "because I didn't want to watch another good thing get destroyed by a man like Nathan Cole." She held his gaze. "That's not quite the same as answering my question," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She turned and walked back toward the house. At the porch, she stopped without turning around. "Tonight after supper," she said, "you're going to tell me everything you know about Nathan Cole, all of it. Whatever you've been carrying around." She heard him exhale behind her. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. She went inside. Supper was a quiet affair. Hector and Eli ate in the bunkhouse as usual. Clara cooked, not because she felt any obligation to cook for Caleb, but because cooking was what she did when she needed to think, and she had a great deal to think about. She made the kind of meal she'd been making for herself since William died, simple and fast, and hot enough to be satisfying, and she set 2 plates on the kitchen table without ceremony. Caleb sat down when she gestured to the chair. He ate without talking. He didn't compliment the food or ask questions about it, which she appreciated. When the plates were empty, she poured coffee and set his cup in front of him and sat down across the table. "Nathan Cole," she said. He wrapped his hands around the cup. He looked at the table for a moment, and then he looked up and started talking. He'd come from Wyoming 3 years before he'd arrived in Red Valley. Before that, he'd spent 15 years as a trail hand and then a trail boss working the cattle routes from Texas up through Colorado. He'd been saving for a long time. He'd had a partner, a man named James Rourke, who had been his friend since they were young, and the two of them had been pooling money with the plan of buying land and running their own operation. They'd found a property, a good one. River access, good grass, south-facing slope. A man named Harlan Cole had wanted the same property, Nathan Cole's father. "He had legal representation we didn't know about," Caleb said. "He challenged our purchase 6 weeks after we signed. He had a lawyer who found a clause in the original deed that he said invalidated our contract. By the time we got our own lawyer, the property had already been transferred." "And Rourke?" Clara asked quietly. Caleb looked at his cup. "James was angry. He went to confront Harlan Cole directly. That was the last time I saw him." The kitchen was very still. "He just disappeared," Caleb said. "They found his horse 2 days later on Cole land. They never found James." Clara held her breath for a moment. "Nathan Cole's father," she said. "And Nathan learned everything from his father." Caleb looked up. "Including how to use lawyers and lawmen and any legal mechanism available to take what he wants before anyone realizes what's happening. He doesn't use violence when he can use paperwork. But when paperwork isn't fast enough—" He stopped. Clara finished it for him. "He uses other things." "Yes." She thought about William, about the grain depot, about the shot that had found him so precisely in the chest. "You think Nathan had my husband killed?" she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb looked at her carefully. "I think William was the one person in this valley who was actively building a case against Nathan. I think Nathan knew it. And I think the timing of what happened at the grain depot was not an accident. She had known this. She had known it the way you know things that are too large to say out loud, the way you feel them before you have evidence in the body before the mind. But hearing someone else say it, hearing someone say it as clearly and directly as Caleb had just said, it was different. She put her hand flat on the table. she breathed. Then we need evidence, she said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. That's why William hadn't moved yet. He hadn't found enough. Where would it be? If it exists, it would be in Nathan's records, business correspondence, payment ledgers. Caleb turned his cup slowly in his hands. The kind of thing you'd keep locked up. Then we need someone who has access to those records. Clara thought for a moment. Nathan has a bookkeeper, Roy Finn. He's been with Nathan 8 years. He eats lunch at the Red Valley Diner every Tuesday. Caleb looked at her with what might have been surprise. William told me, she said quietly. He told me a lot of things about who Nathan talked to and how and when. He was building a picture. She pressed her lips together. I didn't know he was building it as fast as he was. A pause stretched between them. Mrs. Whitmore, Caleb said. Clara, she said. If we're going to do this, you can call me Clara. Another pause. Longer this time. Clara, he said. Just the word, carefully like he was deciding what it weighed. This is going to get harder before it gets easier. I know. Nathan's going to push harder when he realizes the access road threat didn't work. I know that too. He might try to discredit you, make people think you're not capable of running this place. She looked at him steadily. He can try. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and then so briefly she almost missed it. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, something earlier than that, a recognition. All right then, he said. He picked up his coffee cup. She picked up hers. Outside, the wind moved through the grass the way it always did in the valley after dark, low and steady, and without any intention of stopping. Clara listened to it and thought about William, about evidence, about Nathan Cole's locked records, about the gray-eyed man sitting across from her at her kitchen table, who had lost something too, who carried it in the same quiet way she was learning to carry her own loss. And she thought, this is not what I planned. None of this is what I planned, but it might be what has to happen. She set down her cup. 6 a.m, she said. Caleb nodded. Good night, Mr. Dawson. Good night, Clara. She got up from the table and walked down the hall to her room. William's room. Still his room, still smelling faintly of him, and she closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry. She was too angry to cry. And for the first time since she had found William on the floor of the grain depot, with his hand pressed to his chest and his eyes already losing focus, for the first time since that moment, the anger felt like something she could use. She was going to need it. 2 days passed. Caleb began moving through the ranch the way water finds its level, without announcement, without disruption, simply finding the places where work needed doing and doing it. He was up before 5 both mornings. She heard him in the kitchen before she was out of her room, heard the sound of the stove being stoked, and came out both times to find the coffee already made. She said nothing about it. He said nothing about it either. By the second afternoon, Eli had stopped giving Caleb the suspicious sideways looks he'd been using since the wedding day. By the second evening, Hector had invited Caleb to sit with them after supper, which was not something Hector did lightly with people he didn't know. Clara noticed all of it. She also noticed the way Caleb moved around the property, not like a man looking for what he could take from it, but like a man who was looking for what was broken. By midweek, he had replaced the cracked support post on the east side of the barn, restrung 40 feet of fence along the north pasture, and identified a problem with the water routing to the west grazing field that had been causing a dry patch Clara had chalked up to bad soil. He showed her. See how the runoff angle here creates a blockage when the ground's dry. He crouched down and drew a line in the dirt with his finger. If you redirect it about 20 degrees south, you'd add another 3 acres of usable grazing. She crouched beside him and looked at the line he'd drawn. He was right. It was clearly right, and she understood immediately what he was describing, and she felt 2 things simultaneously: gratitude that he'd found it, and a complex irritation at herself for not having found it first. I'll tell Eli to start on it tomorrow, she said. I can start it tonight. Eli can do it. She stood up. You don't need to work from sunup to dark. He looked up at her from where he was still crouched. I don't sleep that well anyway. There was something in his voice when he said it, not asking for sympathy, just stating a fact the way you'd state that the sky was a particular color. She filed it away. Then give him the plans in the morning, she said. We can start together. He nodded. He stood. They walked back toward the house side by side in the early evening light, and for a few minutes, neither of them said anything. And Clara thought about how strange it was, this whole arrangement these few days. This man, and how strangeness, when you move through it, carefully, sometimes resolved into something you hadn't expected. She didn't know what this was resolving into. Not yet. But she was paying attention. On the morning of the 5th day, a letter arrived from Nathan Cole. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Dawson, in handwriting that was too neat to be anything other than a lawyer's. And Clara opened it at the kitchen table with Caleb across from her and read it out loud. It was an offer to purchase the ranch. The number was generous. Not fair generous. Generous in the way that made it obvious Nathan knew the property was worth more and was counting on urgency or grief or simple exhaustion to make the offer look better than it was. Clara set the letter on the table. She looked at Caleb. He looked at the letter. He's nervous, Caleb said. Why? Because he expected the access road threat to move faster. He expected you to be less settled than you are. He picked up the letter, scanned it. This is him trying a different door before he tries a window. She thought about that. Then we need to move faster. Tuesday, he said. Roy Finn, the diner. She looked at him. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. Tell me. He told her. It wasn't complicated. Nothing that worked ever was. But it required Roy Finn to be the kind of man who, under certain conditions, with the right approach, might find his conscience more powerful than his loyalty to Nathan Cole. And it required someone to make that approach. He won't talk to you, she said. He doesn't know you. You'd be a stranger asking him to do something that could get him fired or worse. No, Caleb agreed. But he knew William. She went still. He came to the funeral, Caleb said quietly. Finn came to your husband's funeral. I saw him in the back of the church. He didn't stay for the burial. But he came. Clara thought about this. A man who comes to the funeral of the person his employer might have helped kill. A man who carries something. He might talk to me, she said slowly. Caleb said nothing. He was letting her arrive at it herself. Tuesday, she said. Tuesday. He agreed. She looked down at Nathan Cole's letter. At the generous number. At the neat lawyer's handwriting. She picked it up. She walked it over to the stove. She opened the door and dropped it in. She watched it catch. Start writing the reply. She said, when you have time. Something polite. We're not interested. All right? She closed the stove door. Tuesday was 3 days away. She had work to do. Tuesday came in cold and gray, the kind of morning that made the valley feel smaller than it was. Clara was up at 4:30. She didn't tell Caleb she hadn't slept. She didn't need to when she came into the kitchen and found him already at the stove with coffee made and his coat on. She understood that he hadn't slept either, and neither of them said anything about it. That was becoming its own kind of language between them. The things they didn't say. The things that sat on the table between them like objects that didn't need to be named. She drank her coffee standing up. He sat across from her and did the same. You know what you're going to say to him? Caleb asked. I'll know when I'm in front of him. He looked at her over his cup. That's either very confident or very dangerous. Probably both. She set her cup down. Roy Finn is a careful man. He's been with Nathan 8 years, and he's never once said a wrong word about him in public, which means he either believes in Nathan completely or he's afraid of him completely. Men who came to funerals the way he came to William's, they're not believers. They're guilty. Caleb was quiet for a moment. And you're going to use that. I'm going to give him a place to put it. She met his eyes. There's a difference. He nodded slowly, not agreeing exactly, acknowledging. She picked up her coat from the hook by the door. "I'll be back by noon." "I'll be here." She stopped at the door. Something made her turn back. She wasn't sure what, some instinct, some awareness of the weight of what she was walking into. "If I'm not back by 1 o'clock, I'll come looking," he said, simple and flat, like it was already decided. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she walked out. The Red Valley Diner sat at the main intersection of town and had been there longer than most of the buildings around it, which was obvious from the way the floor sloped slightly toward the west, and the front door had to be lifted slightly to close properly. Clara had eaten breakfast there more times than she could count, mostly with William after church on Sundays, and walking in alone felt like walking into a room where something was missing that nobody else could see. She took the table by the window. She ordered coffee and a plate of eggs she didn't particularly want, and she sat with her back to the wall the way William had always done, and she waited. Roy Finn walked in at 11 minutes past 10. He was a slight man, mid-40s, with a tidy gray mustache and the careful, contracted posture of someone who had learned early in life to take up as little space as possible. He wore a brown coat and carried a leather case under his arm, and he went to his usual table. She had confirmed with the waitress which one it was without looking around the room. Then he looked around the room. He saw her. Something moved across his face, not quite panic, but its cousin. He looked at the door, then back at her, and Clara could see him making the calculation, and she held his gaze steadily, so that he understood she had chosen this table this morning, this timing on purpose, and that leaving now would not make that fact go away. He sat down at his usual table. She gave him 3 minutes. Then she picked up her coffee and walked over. "Mr. Finn," she said. "May I sit?" He looked like a man being asked if he'd like to be handed something hot. "Mrs. Whitmore." Yes, of course." He half stood and then sat back down. "I was sorry to hear about William, about the sheriff. He was a good man." "He was." She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. "He spoke well of you." Finn blinked. "Did he?" "He said you were the most meticulous bookkeeper in the valley." She let that sit for a moment. "He said he'd never seen anyone keep records as precisely as you did." Finn's hand moved toward his coffee cup and stopped without reaching it. "That's William said that. About 8 months ago. We were talking about Nathan Cole's operation, and William said that whoever was keeping Nathan's books was either extraordinarily careful or extraordinarily worried about making a mistake." She looked at Finn directly. He thought it was probably both. The table between them went very still. "Mrs. Whitmore," Finn said quietly, "I don't think I should—" "I'm not asking you to do anything, Mr. Finn." She kept her voice completely calm. "I'm telling you that my husband respected you. And I'm telling you that I'm sitting here this morning because I think you're a man who has been carrying something for a long time, and I think it's getting heavy." Finn looked at his coffee cup. His jaw was working slightly, like he was chewing on something that had no give to it. "I came to the funeral," he said finally, very quietly. "I saw you." I wasn't sure I didn't want to intrude." "You didn't intrude." She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Finn, I know what Nathan Cole is doing to this valley. I know what he's done to the smaller ranchers. I know about August Freed in Billings. And I know that my husband was building a case against Nathan before he was killed, and I know that the timing of his death was not an accident." Finn's face had gone the color of old paper. "I can't," he started. "I'm not asking you to testify, not today. I'm not asking you to put yourself at risk." She kept her eyes on his. "I'm asking you whether what you know could help me understand what I'm dealing with. I'm asking you whether there is anything that exists in those records that would tell me what Nathan has done and how he's done it." A long silence. Long enough that the waitress came and refilled Finn's coffee and walked away again without either of them looking at her. "There are payment records," Finn said. He said it to the table, not to her. His voice was barely above a murmur. "Cash payments, to individuals whose names don't appear anywhere else in the business accounts. going back 4 years. Clara kept her breathing even. What kind of amounts? Large. He pressed his lips together. Significant amounts, made in irregular intervals, sometimes monthly, sometimes after specific dates. She understood what he was saying without him saying it. After specific dates, after specific events, after men sold land they hadn't wanted to sell, after fires, after accidents, after a shooting at a grain depot. "Where are those records?" she asked. "Locked." His hand finally reached his cup. He picked it up but didn't drink. "In the safe in Nathan's personal office. The main ledgers are in my office, but the secondary set." He stopped. "Secondary set?" she repeated. He looked up at her then. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been holding a door closed for a very long time and was beginning to understand that he couldn't hold it much longer. "I keep the books Nathan shows people, and there is another set of books that Nathan keeps himself. I have seen them twice, both times by accident." He set his cup down. "Both times Nathan was in the room when I saw them, and both times he watched my face to see if I'd understood what I was looking at." "And had you?" "Yes," Finn said simply. "I had." The diner was filling up around them. Other people coming in for late breakfast. The sound of chairs and conversation, and the smell of coffee and grease, and the ordinary business of a Tuesday morning. And in the middle of all of it, Clara sat across from Roy Finn, and felt the ground shift underneath her. Nathan had a second set of books. A record of everything. "Mr. Finn!" She kept her voice absolutely steady. "Are you safe?" He looked at her like the question surprised him. "I mean it," she said. "Does Nathan trust you?" Yes. I think so. I have never given him reason not to." He paused. "I have never given him reason not to, because I have been afraid to." "I understand." She looked at him carefully. "I want you to keep it that way. I want you to go back to work today and be exactly who you have always been. I want Nathan to have no reason to look at you twice." He stared at her. And when the time comes when I can tell you it's safe, I'm going to need you to be willing to tell someone official what you've told me. Not today, when it's safe." Finn was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, "Your husband told me something about 6 months before he died. He came to talk to me, not officially, just he stopped by when Nathan was out. He said, 'Roy, if something happens to me, there will be someone who comes to find the truth. Make sure they find you.'" He looked at his coffee cup. I didn't know what he meant at the time. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. "He meant me," she said. Finn nodded. Just once. She stood. She put money on the table for her coffee. She looked down at him. "Tuesday mornings," she said. "I'll know where to find you." She walked out of the diner without looking at anyone else in the room. Caleb was fixing the north gate when she rode back in. He heard her coming and turned, and whatever was in her face made him put down the tools and walk toward her without her having to say anything. She dismounted and told him everything. Fast, precise, without embellishment. She told him about Finn, about the secondary ledgers, about William's visit 6 months before his death. She told him what Finn had said about specific dates and significant cash payments. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "William knew," he said. "He was closer than I realized." She pressed her hand flat against her horse's neck, steadying herself. He had already talked to Finn. He was already building something. Her voice tightened. And Nathan knew he was building it. Which means Nathan moved faster than William expected. Yes. Caleb looked out toward the main road. His jaw was tight. "Then Nathan's going to figure out you were at the diner this morning. He has people in town. He'll know before tonight." Clara had already thought about this. "Then we need to be ahead of him. We need to move before he can shift those records somewhere we can't reach. We can't get into his office." "No." She looked at Caleb. "But there's someone who can." He looked at her. "Tom Briggs," she said. "The court recorder. William was friends with him. If we can establish that we have a witness, if we can tell Briggs enough to get him to formally request Nathan's financial records as part of a territorial court inquiry, Nathan will hide them before Briggs can get a writ. Not if we give Briggs enough to go to the territorial marshal instead of the local court." Caleb went still. "The territorial marshal operates out of Helena. If you escalate to Helena, Nathan loses his local protection. Harrison can't run interference for him against a federal-level inquiry." She held Caleb's gaze. William's whole strategy was building something too big for local politics to swallow. He just didn't get to finish it. The silence between them was full and tight. "You're going to finish it," Caleb said. "We're going to finish it." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face had changed. She could see it and couldn't fully name it. Not warmth exactly, but something in that neighborhood, something that had moved closer without announcing itself. "All right," he said. "When do we go to Briggs?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Tonight I need to write everything down. Everything Finn told me, everything I know about William's investigation, everything we know about Nathan's pattern across the valley. I need it documented before Nathan has a chance to reframe any of it." "I'll help you." She looked at him a little surprised. "It'll take most of the night." "I told you," he said simply. "I don't sleep that well." Something moved through her chest that she didn't examine too closely. She nodded. She led her horse to the barn. They worked at the kitchen table until past midnight. Clara wrote, and Caleb sat across from her, and she would say things out loud as she wrote them. Dates, names, specific incidents. She remembered William mentioning, and Caleb would either confirm them against his own knowledge or add details she didn't have. It was strange work, collaborative in a way she hadn't expected, and several times she looked up from the page to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. She kept writing. At some point around 11 he got up and made more coffee without being asked, and when he set her cup beside her hand she said, "Thank you," without looking up from the page, and she heard him say, "Sure," in that quiet, unlabored way he said most things, and she was aware in a way that she was careful not to examine that it felt unexpectedly natural. Two people in a kitchen, late at night, working on something that mattered. She had not had that with anyone since William. She filed that thought away. By midnight, they had 12 pages. A detailed chronology of Nathan Cole's land acquisitions over 6 years, cross-referenced with the incidents, the fires, the fence cuttings, the pressures and disappearances that had preceded ranchers selling to him. They had the names of 8 properties. They had August Freed in Billings. They had Roy Finn's testimony about the cash payments framed as a sworn statement ready for Finn to sign when the time came. And at the bottom of the last page, Clara wrote William's name. She looked at it for a moment. Then she signed her own name beneath it. "It's enough to start," Caleb said. She looked up. He was reading the last page over her shoulder, and she realized he had moved closer at some point without her noticing. He was close enough that she could have reached out and touched his arm. She didn't. "It needs to be more than a start," she said. "We have testimony and pattern. We don't have the secondary ledger. Briggs can compel it. Only if he takes it to Helena." "He will." Caleb looked at her. "He will because he knows what this is, and because he was William's friend." She looked down at the pages. At 12 pages of everything William had been building before someone had stopped him. "Caleb?" She said it without looking up. "Yeah. Why did you really come here?" A pause. She heard him move. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She looked up. He had his hands on the table. He was looking at them. "I told you I came because I didn't want to watch Nathan Cole destroy another good thing." "You did. That's true. But it's not all of it." He looked up. His eyes in the lamplight were very dark and very direct. "I came because when I heard what happened to William, when I heard a sheriff in Red Valley had been shot at the grain depot, I knew. I knew it was the same pattern. I had seen it in Billings. I had seen it in Wyoming before that. He paused. And I knew that whoever he'd left behind was going to need someone who understood what Nathan Cole was capable of. She looked at him. You came here for me. I came here for what was right. He held her gaze. And you happened to be the person holding it. She was very still for a moment. Then she said, James Rourke, your friend. Something moved across his face. You've been doing this for him, she said quietly. Every time Nathan Cole comes after something good, you've been doing it for James. He didn't answer for a long time. The lamp flickered slightly between them. Outside, the wind moved through the grass low and steady, and without any intention of stopping. Something like that, he said finally. She looked at him, this quiet, careful, scarred man who had carried a dead friend across 4 years and several states, and had walked into a courthouse and agreed to marry a stranger because the alternative was watching something good be destroyed, and she felt something shift inside her. Not toward him, not yet. But something that had been braced and rigid for the past 2 weeks moved slightly like a door that has been bolted from the inside, beginning to consider the possibility of opening. She looked back down at the pages. 12 pages, she said. 12 pages. He agreed. Get some sleep, she said. We go to Briggs first thing. Tom Briggs received them in his office at 8 in the morning, with the expression of a man who had been half expecting this visit for some time and was relieved it had finally arrived. He was a thin man in his mid-50s, with careful eyes and ink-stained fingers, and he had known William Whitmore for 6 years. When Clara put the 12 pages on his desk, he picked them up without speaking and read them straight through, while she and Caleb sat across from him and waited. When he finished, he set them down and looked at Clara. William came to see me, he said. 3 weeks before he died. He said he was close to something and he needed to know the proper channel if he needed to go above Harrison. Clara gripped the arms of her chair. What did you tell him? I gave him the name of the territorial marshal in Helena, a man named Aldridge. Briggs looked at the pages again. William said he'd be back in 2 weeks. He was going to have something concrete by then. He ran out of time, Caleb said quietly. Briggs looked at him. Who are you exactly, and why are you in this? Caleb told him. The short version, Wyoming Billings, James Rourke, Nathan Cole's pattern. He laid it out the way he'd laid it out to Clara at the kitchen table, and he did it without drama or embellishment. And Briggs listened, the way careful men listen without reaction, taking everything in. When Caleb finished, Briggs was quiet for a moment. If I take this to Aldridge and Helena, he said slowly, Nathan Cole will know within 48 hours. He has connections at the territorial level. How? Clara asked. Judge Harrison. Briggs pressed his lips together. Harrison and the territorial circuit are close. Closer than they should be. Caleb leaned forward. Then don't go through the circuit. Is there a way to contact Aldridge directly privately? Briggs looked at him. There's a Federal Land Commission inquiry that's been running in the territory for the past 8 months, investigating irregular land acquisitions. It operates independently of the territorial circuit. He paused. I know the commissioner. Clara stared at him. How long have you known about this commission? 6 months. His voice was very careful. William knew too. It was the channel he was planning to use. The room was very quiet. Mr. Briggs, Clara said, why didn't you move on this after William died? He looked at her, and in his face she saw something she recognized, the same thing she'd seen in Roy Finn's face at the diner, the same compressed guilt, the same weight of having known and waited and told himself it wasn't yet time. Because I was afraid, he said. Simply, without excuse. Because Harrison has reach, and Nathan has money, and I am a court recorder in a small valley town. And I was afraid. And now? Caleb asked. Briggs looked at the 12 pages on his desk. Now I have a widow and a former trail boss sitting in my office with documented evidence, and I am tired of being afraid. He picked up the pages. I'll contact the Land Commission today, through a private channel, not through the circuit. How long? Clara asked. A week? Maybe 2? Nathan will move in that window. I know. Briggs looked at her steadily, which means you need to keep Nathan looking at you instead of at me. Give him something to focus on. Make him think you're negotiating or delaying or afraid. Clara thought about this. She thought about Nathan's generous letter, the one she'd burned in the stove. I can do that, she said. She stood. Caleb stood beside her. Tom. She said his first name, the name William had used for him. Thank you. Briggs looked at her with something in his face that was past guilt and past fear on the other side of both. Your husband was a good man, Clara. The best man in this valley. He looked at Caleb briefly, then back at her. It seems like he left things in capable hands. She nodded. She turned toward the door. Caleb held it open for her without thinking about it, without ceremony, and she walked through without acknowledging it, and neither of them said anything about the fact that it was a small thing, and not a small thing at all. Nathan Cole was waiting on the porch of the general store when they came out of Briggs's building. He had 2 men behind him, and he was wearing his good coat, and his expression was the expression of a man who had arranged the encounter in advance and wanted that to be known. He looked at Clara, and then at Caleb, and then back at Clara, and he smiled. Mrs. Dawson. He came down the steps toward her. I was hoping to run into you. Mr. Cole. She stopped at an appropriate distance. Caleb stopped beside her, slightly behind. I assume you received my letter. I did. And I've given it careful consideration. She kept her voice pleasant, neutral, the voice you used when you were doing something with your face that was different from what was happening inside you. It's a generous offer. Nathan's smile widened slightly. I thought so. I'd like some time to think it over properly. A week, perhaps. A beat. Nathan's eyes moved to Caleb, measuring, calculating. A week is reasonable. He looked back at Clara. I want you to know, Clara. May I call you Clara? This offer comes from a place of genuine concern. A woman in your position taking on the burden of that ranch alone. She's not alone. Caleb's voice was flat and even, and not loud. He didn't step forward. He just said it. Nathan looked at him. The 2 men behind Nathan looked at Caleb. Of course not, Nathan said smoothly. You have Mr. Dawson's help. Though I understand running a ranch of that size requires significant resources, more than a trail hand's experience might prepare you for. He said trail hand, the way some men said words they intended as a step lower than where they found you. Caleb didn't blink. 1 week, Clara said, drawing Nathan's attention back to her. I'll be in touch. She turned and walked to her horse. Behind her, she heard Nathan say not to her, to the air in general, but loud enough. I do hope she makes the right decision. She didn't turn around. She mounted up, and Caleb mounted up beside her, and they rode out of town at a steady pace side by side, not rushing because Nathan was watching, and she would not give him the satisfaction of speed. When they were out of sight of the main street, she exhaled. He knows we went to see Briggs, she said. Probably. Caleb glanced behind them. He had someone watching the building. Did you see who? Cross. He was around the side of the feed store. I spotted him when we came out. She thought about that. What did you see in Nathan's face when you said I wasn't alone? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Recalculation, he said. He expected you to be easier than you are. He expected me to be someone he could work around. And now he's adjusting. Caleb looked at her. Which means we need to move before he finishes adjusting. She nodded. 1 week, she said. They rode in silence for a while, side by side, the only sound the movement of their horses on the road and the wind low through the valley grass. Then Caleb said quietly and without inflection, You handled that well. She looked at him. The pleasant act, giving him what he needed to see, without giving him anything real. He looked forward again. It takes something. She thought about what to say. She decided on the truth. I learned it from William. He used to say the best way to manage a dangerous man is to let him think he's managing you. Caleb was quiet for a moment. William sounds like a man worth knowing. It was the right thing to say, and she felt it land precisely not painfully, but with a kind of clean ache, the way the right words sometimes hurt and help at the same time. He was, she said. They rode on. The ranch came into view ahead of them, and the yard was busy. Eli in the east pasture, Hector at the water routing project. Caleb had identified the horses moving in the afternoon light, and Clara looked at all of it and felt the familiar weight of it, the weight of something worth fighting for, and she felt it differently than she had in the days immediately after William died when it had felt like a burden. Now it felt like something else. Not quite purpose. Not yet. But it's beginning. She looked over at Caleb as they came through the gate. "Tonight," she said, "I'm going to write a letter to Roy Finn. Tell him what we've started. Give him the chance to be ready when the time comes. All right? And I'm going to write to Nathan. String him along for the week he expects. All right." She dismounted. "And tomorrow I need you to show me everything you know about Nathan's operation. The land parcels he's acquired, the sequence, the timing. You said you'd been watching his pattern. I want to see all of it." He dismounted beside her. "It's going to take a full day." "Then we'll start early." She started toward the house. She heard him behind her, and then his voice, "Clara." She stopped and turned. He was standing with his horse's reins in his hand, and there was something in his face that she hadn't seen there before, not quite open, but less closed than he usually allowed himself to be. Like a window that had been cracked slightly to let air in. "For what it's worth," he said. "William was right to trust Finn. And Finn was right to wait for you." He paused. "You're the right person to finish this." She held his gaze for a moment. "We'll see," she said, but something in her chest said yes, maybe. She went inside. The letter to Nathan went out Wednesday morning, written in Clara's hand on good paper, polite and non-committal, and carefully constructed to sound like a woman wrestling with a difficult decision. She told him she was considering his offer seriously. She told him she appreciated his patience. She told him she would need a few more days to consult with her late husband's business contacts before she could give him a proper answer. Every word of it was a lie. Every word of it bought them time. She sealed it herself and sent Eli into town with it, and when Eli came back that afternoon, he reported that Nathan's man had taken it at the door of the Cole property and had not said a single word in response. Clara filed that detail away. Silent receipt meant Nathan was pleased. Pleased meant he believed her. Good. She needed him believing her for exactly 6 more days. Caleb spent Wednesday and Thursday walking her through everything he knew about Nathan's land acquisition pattern, and he knew more than she had expected. He had a map hand-drawn covered in notations and dates that he'd been building for the better part of a year, tracking which properties Nathan had acquired in what sequence and what had preceded each transaction. He spread it on the kitchen table and walked her through it like a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to show it to. "See this cluster here?" He pointed to the eastern section of the valley. "These 4 properties all transferred to Cole within a 14-month window. Before each transfer there was an incident. Feed contamination on this one, a collapsed well on this one. 2 of the ranch hands on this property left suddenly, nobody knows why, and the owner couldn't manage alone." Clara looked at the map. She looked at the notations. She said, "Where does our ranch fall in this?" Caleb moved his finger to the center of the map. "Here. You're the keystone. The Whitmore property has river access that none of Nathan's acquired land has independently. Without access to your river frontage, the eastern cluster and the western cluster are 2 separate operations. With it, they become one contiguous holding." He looked up at her. "Nathan can't build what he's building without this land." She looked at the map for a long time. "That's why he used the law instead of the usual pressure," she said slowly. "He couldn't afford to drive me out the way he drove out the others. If he spooked the cattle or contaminated the feed or made the ranch unlivable, the land's value to him drops. He needs it operational." "He needs it operational, and he needs it clean," Caleb said. A purchase under duress with a widow who remarried under territorial law that's clean. That's a legal transaction he can defend. And if I'd married Nathan instead of you, he would have owned it outright inside 6 months. Territorial law would have given him every tool he needed to transfer the deed. Caleb paused. That's why he arranged it to be Nathan or me. He expected me to be easier to manage. A man with no local ties, no reputation, no leverage. Someone he could pressure or buy out once the marriage was in place. Clara looked at him. He miscalculated. He did. Something moved between them, at that a small shared recognition, the kind that doesn't require comment. She looked back at the map. We take this to Briggs, she said. Today. This goes with the 12 pages. I was going to suggest the same thing. They went that afternoon. Briggs looked at the map for a long time without speaking. He held it under the good light from his office window and moved his eyes across it slowly, and Clara watched his expression change from careful attention to something grimmer and more settled. He set it down. I sent the letter to Commissioner Aldridge yesterday, he said. Private courier, not through the circuit post. If the timing holds, I should have a response by end of week. End of week is cutting close, Caleb said. I know it. Briggs looked at the map again. If Aldridge moves on this, he'll need to move fast. Nathan will find out something is happening when Aldridge's office starts pulling territorial land records. That gives us at best 48 hours between the moment Nathan realizes what's coming and the moment the commission can formally subpoena his records. In those 48 hours, Clara said, Nathan will try to move the secondary ledger. Or destroy it. Finn, Caleb said. They both looked at him. If Finn knows the subpoena is coming, Caleb said, he can document what he's seen before Nathan has a chance to hide it. A sworn affidavit about the secondary ledger's existence, the dates, the amounts, the pattern. Even if Nathan destroys the physical records, a corroborating witness statement changes what the commission can do. Briggs was nodding slowly. A statement from an inside witness who has seen the records firsthand. That's significant. Can you talk to Finn? Clara asked Briggs. Officially enough to give him protection, unofficially enough that Nathan doesn't hear about it yet. Briggs thought about this. I can visit him in a professional capacity. Records review. It's routine enough not to raise questions. He looked at Clara. He'll know what it means. He'll say yes, Clara said. She was almost certain of it. She had seen Roy Finn's face in the diner. She had seen the weight he was carrying. Some weights can only be set down one way. Thursday, Briggs said. I'll go to Finn on Thursday. Clara nodded. And we wait for Aldridge. You wait for Aldridge. Briggs looked at her squarely. And you keep Nathan looking at that letter you sent him. Keep him comfortable. Give him nothing to react to. She nodded again. She took the map back from Briggs's desk, rolled it, and tucked it under her arm. Tom, she said, how long have you been waiting for someone to walk into your office with enough to act on? Briggs was quiet for a moment. Since the night William Whitmore walked out of it for the last time, he said. She held his gaze. Then she left. Thursday passed quietly. Friday passed with a tension that sat in the air of the ranch like the feeling before a lightning storm. Not visible, not audible, but present in everything. Caleb worked through both days at the same steady pace he always worked, and Clara worked beside him or near him, and the ordinary functions of the ranch continued the way ordinary things continue, even when larger things are building underneath them. She noticed things about him that week in the spaces between the urgency. She noticed that he was the first one to the barn every morning, and the last one to leave it at night, not out of performance, but out of genuine feeling for the animals. He moved around horses, the way you move around people, you like with attention and patience and a kind of instinctive consideration. She noticed that when Eli said something stupid at supper, which Eli did regularly, because Eli was 19 and had a 19-year-old's conviction that his opinions were fully formed. Caleb didn't dismiss him. He waited, and then he asked a question that led Eli to the better answer himself. And Eli thought he'd arrived there on his own, and everyone at the table was better for it. She noticed that he never once in the days since they'd begun working toward Nathan's exposure expressed doubt about whether it would work. Not false confidence. Something more useful than that, a kind of bedrock steadiness. The steadiness of someone who has already lost the thing they were most afraid of losing and has discovered that they're still standing. She thought about James Rourke. She thought about what it costs a person to lose a friend that way, not to distance or argument, or the ordinary driftings of life, but to something deliberate and cruel and unresolved. She thought about how you carry that. Whether you carry it as grief, or as purpose, or as both at once layered together until you can't separate them. She thought Caleb had found a way to carry it as both. She didn't say any of this to him, but she thought it. Saturday morning, Briggs's reply came. Not from Briggs, from Tom Briggs's assistant, a young man named Peter who arrived at the ranch gate on horseback and handed Clara a sealed envelope and left without waiting. She opened it at the kitchen table with Caleb across from her. Aldridge confirms. Commission inquiry opens Monday. Subpoena for coal financial records to be issued through federal channel Tuesday morning. Harrison Circuit bypassed. Finn has agreed. Statement being prepared. Do not contact me until Monday. TB. She read it twice. She set it on the table. Caleb read it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Monday, he said. 2 days. We need to keep Nathan quiet for 2 more days. She nodded. She looked at the letter. She turned it face down on the table as if she were closing something. What do we do with 2 days? She asked. He looked at her. We work. We do exactly what we always do. We don't change anything. Nathan will be watching. Let him watch. The more normal everything looks, the better. She looked at him for a moment. You're very calm about this. One of us should be. She almost smiled. It surprised her. The almost smile surprised her by arriving before she could decide whether to let it. She pressed her lips together and looked back at the letter. 2 days, she said. Outside, a wind was starting to build. The storm hit Saturday night. It came in from the northwest. The way the worst storms came in the valley fast, and without much warning. A cold front dropping temperature 20 degrees in an hour, the sky going from gray to black to something that had no color at all. Clara heard it in her sleep before she was properly awake, the sound of something hitting the barn, a banging that resolved as she came fully conscious into the sound of a door that hadn't been properly latched, swinging hard in the wind. She was up and dressed in 3 minutes. She came out of her room to find Caleb already at the front door, pulling his coat on, and they didn't exchange words, just moved together out of the house and into the yard, where the wind was pulling at everything that wasn't nailed down. The horses were the first problem. The east pasture gate had blown open, and 3 of the horses were out and in the dark and the wind. They were difficult to see and more difficult to predict. Clara took the left side of the pasture, and Caleb took the right without discussing it. And for 40 minutes they worked in the howling dark to collect the horses and get them back through the gate. Hector and Eli came out of the bunkhouse halfway through and took over the horses, freeing Clara and Caleb to deal with the barn door, which had not just blown open, but had pulled its top hinge half out of the frame and was now swinging badly enough to do structural damage if it kept going. I need something to stand on, Caleb said, looking at the hinge. And a hammer and the right size nail. Barn north wall tool rack, Clara said. He went. She held the door against the wind, which was harder than it sounded, and she planted her feet and put her shoulder against it and used her whole body to hold it steady while the storm pulled at it with both hands. Her arms were burning by the time Caleb came back with the tools. He climbed the fence rail to reach the hinge. He worked fast with the certainty of someone who had repaired 100 things in difficult conditions. And Clara watched his hands, those scarred, capable hands, and held the door, and thought that this was what she'd been missing about him in the beginning. The surface of him was so still and so removed that you could look at it and see nothing. But his hands told a different story. His hands told the story of a man who, when something needed doing, did it. The hinge held. The door closed. They stood in the sudden relative quiet of the inside of the barn. Clara's arms were still shaking slightly from holding the door. She pressed them flat against her sides so it wouldn't show, but she was also breathing harder than she wanted to be, and she was aware that Caleb could see that. "You held it," he said, not surprised exactly, something more like a recognition he'd already had confirmed. It needed holding. He was looking at her in the dim interior light, and there was something different in his face from what she'd seen there before. The stillness was still there, but it had moved, not gone, but shifted to make room for something else, something less defended. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked down. Her palm had caught the edge of the hinge at some point she hadn't felt it. She'd been too focused on the door, and there was a cut running along the heel of her left hand. Not deep, but producing a disproportionate amount of blood, the way hand cuts always did. She looked at it without much alarm. "It's fine. It needs cleaning. In a minute. Clara." He said it with enough weight that she looked up. "The horses are in. The door is fixed. Hector and Eli can handle the rest." He was already moving toward the tack room, where there was a basic kit. "Come here." She went. She didn't know entirely why she went so readily, whether it was the tone of his voice which had something in it she hadn't heard before, or whether it was just that it had been a long week, and she was tired, in a bone-deep way, that she had been pushing past for days. She sat on the tack room bench and let him clean the cut, and his hands were very careful, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said quietly, and without looking up from her hand, "I need to tell you something." She kept her voice even. "All right. When I agreed to this, to the marriage, to coming here, I had reasons I told you. Nathan Cole, James, doing what was right." He was wrapping the cut now, careful and deliberate. "Those were true. All of them were true. But," she said. He looked up. His eyes in the low light were very dark and very direct, and what was in them was something she had not seen a person look at her with in a long time, something uncomplicated and clear and without agenda. "But when I walked into that courthouse, and I saw you stand up and say what you said to the room about the 8 years, about the land, about not needing saving." He stopped for a moment. "I had already agreed to do the right thing, and then you made it something else." She sat very still. "What did I make it?" she asked. "Something I actually wanted," he said. "Not just something I was doing because it was right." The barn was quiet around them. Outside the storm was still going, but in the tack room it was just the sound of their own breathing and the small sound of him tying off the bandage. She looked down at her wrapped hand. "Caleb," she said. "I know," he said quickly. "I know this isn't, I'm not asking you for anything. I didn't want to keep carrying that around without you knowing it. I know you're not asking for anything." She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the exact texture of the scar that ran along his jaw, close enough that she could see that the stillness in his face right now was not its usual quality. It was the stillness of someone who has said something true and is waiting to see what truth costs. She reached up and she touched his face. She didn't plan to. It was the same kind of thing she sometimes said without planning to the truth arriving before she'd decided to let it. Her hand, the uncut one, rested against his jaw, and she felt him go completely still, in a way that was different from his usual stillness. Like something that had been braced for a very long time had stopped bracing. "Nobody's touched you like that in a while," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. The word was barely a word. She kept her hand where it was. "I'm not in the same place you are," she said honestly. "I still wake up reaching for a man who isn't there. I'm still mostly made of that." "I know. But I don't think you're nothing to me," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever this becomes, you're not nothing." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She could feel the answer in the slight change of his breathing, in the way he turned his face almost imperceptibly into her hand, like a man leaning toward warmth after a long time in the cold. And then, in a moment that belonged to neither of them fully, and to both of them completely, she leaned forward and she kissed him. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not the kind of kiss that resolves things or declares things or burns a bridge behind you. It was the kind of kiss that two people share when they are both standing at the edge of something they hadn't expected to find and are not yet sure whether to step forward. Tentative and real and over quickly, and followed by a silence that was not awkward so much as full. She sat back. He opened his eyes. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them smiled, because it wasn't the kind of moment you smile at. It was the kind you simply hold for a moment to make sure it was real. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. She stood up. She picked up her coat from where she'd dropped it. She moved toward the door. "Clara," he said. She stopped but didn't turn. "I want you to know something else," he said. "Whatever happens with Nathan, whatever happens with any of it, I'm not going anywhere. Not because the law says I have to stay, because I don't want to leave." She stood in the doorway for a moment. She pressed her palm flat against the doorframe, the good hand, not the cut one, and she felt the wood solid and real beneath her. "Get some sleep," she said. "We've got 2 days." She walked back out into the storm. But something had changed in the space behind her ribs. Something that had been locked up tight for a long time, and it had not opened, not fully, not yet. But it was no longer refusing to. Sunday was deceptively quiet. Clara repaired what the storm had damaged and wrote 3 letters she didn't send, and thought about Monday, and tried not to think about Saturday night, and failed at the last part with some regularity. Caleb worked and didn't press her. She appreciated that more than she could have said. By Sunday evening, the ranch was back in order, and the sky had cleared, and Hector and Eli were in the bunkhouse, and Clara was in the office reviewing the land documents when she heard horses on the road. More than one. She was at the window before she'd consciously decided to move. 3 riders, coming up the main road at a pace that was not casual. The lead rider she recognized after a moment as Denny Cross. Behind him were 2 men she didn't know. She went to the hall. "Caleb?" He was already coming out of his room. He had heard it too. "Cross," she said. He nodded. He was already moving toward the front door. "Wait," she said. "Don't go out first. Let me." He looked at her. "Nathan sent Cross because he thinks a woman will be easier to intimidate than a man," she said. "If you go out first, it confirms that's where the authority is. I go first." Caleb held her gaze for a moment. Then he stepped back. "I'll be right behind you." She went out first. Cross pulled up in the yard and looked down at her from his horse with that particular quality of false patience he carried like a coat. "Evening, Mrs. Dawson." He looked at the house behind her, found Caleb in the doorway, looked back at her. "Mr. Cole asked me to stop by. He hasn't heard anything further about his offer." "He'll hear from me this week," she said. "I said a week." "He's getting impatient." Cross looked around the yard with the deliberate casualness of a man who wanted you to know he'd looked at everything. "Mr. Cole wanted me to mention that he's had some legal questions come up about the original right-of-way agreement. His lawyer thinks there may be a problem with the documentation." Clara went very still inside, not outside. Outside, nothing moved. "Is that right?" she said. "Seems the original agreement may not have been properly filed with the territorial recorder, which would mean the road closure he threatened last week might have legal standing after all." She nodded slowly. "Tell Nathan that I'll have my own lawyer look at the filing. If there's a problem, we'll resolve it through proper channels." Cross's eyes narrowed slightly. "You have a lawyer, Mrs. Dawson. I have access to the territorial recorder's office," she said, "which is effectively the same thing." Briggs. She was talking about Briggs. Cross knew it. She could see it in the slight tightening of his jaw. "Mr. Cole just wants this settled," Cross said. His voice had dropped a register, still polite, but with something under the politeness now. He's a patient man, but even patient men have limits. "Tell Nathan I'll be in touch," she said. "Before the end of the week." A long pause. Cross looked at Caleb again, a different look from the last time, more measuring, less confident. Then he looked back at Clara. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. He turned his horse and the two men turned with him, and they rode back out through the gate. Clara stood in the yard until they were out of sight. Caleb came up beside her. "He's probing. He's nervous." She turned. "Nathan is nervous. He's checking whether we're doing anything, whether we have support, whether I have legal access." She looked at Caleb. "He found out about Briggs." "Maybe." Caleb watched the gate. "Or he's starting to suspect. Either way, he's moving faster than we expected." She felt it, the shift in timing, the ground tilting under their feet. "Monday's too far," she said. "We can't move the commission." "No." She thought fast. "But I can call his bluff on the right-of-way. If I go to Briggs tomorrow morning and we formally file a response to any potential right-of-way challenge, get it on the territorial record before Nathan can file anything, it buys us another layer of protection, and it keeps Briggs in an official role that has cover." Caleb thought about it. "It also tells Nathan you're fighting him on every front." "Good." She looked at him. "I want him to know I'm fighting. I want him focused on me and not on what's coming from Helena. You're going to make yourself the target." She held his gaze steadily. "I already am the target. I'd rather be a target who's moving." He looked at her for a long moment. That same quality of recognition she had seen in him before, the acknowledgement of something in her that he seemed both unsurprised by and quietly awed by. "All right," he said. "First light tomorrow," she said. "We ride to Briggs together." She turned toward the house. "Clara." His voice was quieter than usual. She turned. He was standing in the yard with the night sky behind him and his hands at his sides, and his face in the expression she had come to understand was his honest face, not the closed one, not the defended one, but the one underneath those. "Whatever comes tomorrow," he said, "I've got your back. All the way through." She looked at him. She thought about Saturday night, about her hand against his face, about the word okay, and what it had meant and what it had not yet fully meant. She thought about William, and how William would have known exactly what to say in this moment, and how she would never hear him say anything again. She thought about Caleb, who was not William, and had never tried to be, and who had walked into her life through the worst door and had been against all probability exactly who she needed. "I know," she said, and she meant it. She went inside. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and she pressed both hands flat against her knees, the cut hand and the whole one, and she breathed. And she thought about Monday, and she let herself for exactly 5 minutes think about what might exist on the other side of Monday if they survived it. Then she stood up. She went to the desk. She picked up her pen. She had work to do. Clara and Caleb were on the road before the sun fully cleared the ridge. She hadn't slept much. She could tell from the set of his jaw that he hadn't either. Neither of them mentioned it. They rode into town in the early gray light with the kind of focused quiet between them that had become its own form of communication. Two people who had stopped needing to fill silence because the silence was already full of everything that mattered. Briggs was at his office when they arrived. He had the look of a man who had been there since before dawn. He had a letter on his desk. "Aldridge responded last night," he said before they had fully come through the door. "Private courier. Commission inquiry is confirmed. The subpoena for Cole's financial records will be issued this morning from the Helena Federal Office. It bypasses Harrison completely. By territorial law, Nathan has 72 hours to produce the records for commission review." Clara felt the ground steady under her feet for the first time in days. "And Finn." Finn signed his affidavit Saturday afternoon. Briggs picked up a document from the corner of his desk and held it up. "Sworn statement describing the existence of a secondary set of financial records maintained separately from the official Cole business ledgers. Specific dates, specific amounts, Specific pattern of payments made following property transactions. He set it down. It's enough to establish probable cause for everything else. Nathan doesn't know yet, Caleb said. Not yet, but when the subpoena arrives, and it will arrive by this afternoon if Aldridge's courier is on time, Nathan will know within the hour. He'll contact Harrison first. Harrison will tell him there's nothing he can do about a federal commission order. Briggs paused. And then Nathan will make a decision. He'll go for the records, Clara said. He'll try to move them or destroy them before the 72 hours are up. That's what I'd expect. Briggs looked at her steadily. Which is why I've already requested that a copy of Finn's affidavit be held by the commission office in Helena as well as here. Even if Nathan destroys the physical ledgers, the affidavit establishes their existence. The commission can compel Nathan to account for records that a witness has confirmed he kept. Caleb leaned forward. Can they make that stick? With Finn's statement and your map, Briggs nodded toward the document roll Caleb was carrying, and the 12 pages Clara compiled, yes. It won't be quick. Federal inquiries never are. But yes, it sticks. The office was very quiet for a moment. Then Clara said, Nathan is going to know it was us. He already suspects, Briggs said. I mean, he's going to know for certain. Once the subpoena arrives and he starts calculating backward, he'll trace it to Finn, and Finn will be in danger. She looked at Briggs directly. What protection does Finn have? Briggs pressed his lips together. The commission can provide protective status to witnesses once the inquiry is formally opened. But formally opened means Nathan has been served. So Finn is exposed from the moment Nathan receives the subpoena until the moment the commission formally opens, Caleb said. Yes. How long is that window? Hours, maybe less if Aldridge moves fast. Briggs held Clara's gaze. I'm going to Finn this morning. I'll stay with him until the commission's status is confirmed. Clara nodded. She looked at Caleb. He was already thinking about the next step. She could see it in the way he was looking at the middle distance working through something. Nathan won't go after Finn directly, Caleb said. Not now. Not with a federal subpoena in play. He's too smart for that. He knows that any action against a witness once an inquiry is open is its own federal crime. He looked at Clara. But he'll go after us. She had already thought this. Through the ranch, or through the town. He'll try to discredit everything before the commission can act on it. He'll go to Harrison. He'll use whatever local standing he has to make us look like a bitter widow and a drifter with an axe to grind, Clara said flatly. Caleb held her gaze. Something like that. She turned to Briggs. Can you be available today? Publicly available at your office as court recorder, not as someone involved in this inquiry, just as someone doing your regular work. Briggs understood immediately. So that if Nathan goes to Harrison, and Harrison tries to do anything through local channels, there's an official record of exactly when and what he did, she finished. Yes. Briggs straightened. I'll be here all day. She nodded. She picked up her coat. She looked at Caleb. We go back to the ranch, she said. We work. We do exactly what we always do, and we wait. And if Nathan comes to us directly? She thought about Nathan's face on the main street. His careful smile. The way he said, I do, hope she makes the right decision. We let him come, she said. Yeah, they were back at the ranch by 9. By 10, Eli had reported that 3 coal riders had been seen on the road that crossed the north edge of the property, not on Whitmore land, but moving slowly enough that it wasn't casual. Watching, Caleb said. Let them watch, Clara said. At 11:30, a rider arrived at the gate with a message. Not from Nathan, from Judge Harrison. Clara read it in the yard. It was a formal notice. Harrison was requesting her presence at the courthouse that afternoon regarding, as he put it, a matter pertaining to the validity of recent land documentation filed in the name of the Whitmore Dawson property. She read it twice. She handed it to Caleb. He read it. His jaw tightened. He's trying to file something against the property, Clara said. Something through Harrison through local channels before the federal commission can get established. She thought fast. If Harrison can enter something in the local record that challenges the property's legal standing, it creates a competing claim, Caleb said. Something Nathan's lawyers can use to complicate the commission's process. It won't hold against a federal inquiry. She was thinking out loud quickly. But it creates delay. It creates confusion. And in the confusion, Nathan can argue that the property's status is disputed, which weakens our standing as witnesses. Caleb looked at the message. You're not going. I have to go. If I ignore a formal court notice, then we go together. He handed the message back. He can't keep me out of a public courthouse. She looked at him. He might try. Let him try. Something in the way he said it, not as bravado, not as performance, but as simple grounded fact, settled something in her that had been agitated since the message arrived. Noon, she said. We'll go at noon. She went inside, and she wrote 2 things. The first was a note to Eli and Hector, telling them exactly what to do if anyone came onto the property while she and Caleb were in town. The second was a letter to Briggs sent with the fastest horse they had, telling him what Harrison was doing and asking him to make sure that whatever Harrison filed was immediately entered into the public record so that nothing could be quietly removed later. She sent both. Then she changed into the kind of clothes you wear when you need a town to take you seriously. The courthouse was different at noon than it had been on the morning the ruling was read. It was full then with people who came for the spectacle. Today it was nearly empty. Harrison behind his table, a court clerk in the corner, and Nathan Cole sitting in a chair to the right of the room with his lawyer, a thin man Clara had never seen before, who had the look of someone imported from a larger city for a specific purpose. She came through the door with Caleb directly behind her, and she did not pause at the threshold or look around the room with any question in her expression. She walked to the chair in front of Harrison's table and sat down and looked at the judge. Mrs. Dawson. Harrison arranged his papers. Thank you for coming. Your notice indicated it was required, she said. Yes, well. He shuffled something. The court has received a filing from the Cole legal office raising a question about the right-of-way agreement attached to the Whitmore property. Specifically a question about whether the original filing was properly recorded under territorial procedure. I see. Clara kept her voice completely flat. May I see the filing? Harrison looked faintly uncomfortable. The filing is a public court filing, she said, which I am entitled to review. May I see it? Harrison looked at Nathan's lawyer. The lawyer produced a document and brought it forward. Clara took it. She read it carefully, line by line, while the room waited. The argument was technical, and it was precise, and it had clearly been prepared by someone who knew territorial land law well. It claimed that the original right-of-way agreement filed 11 years ago, when William had established the homestead, had been recorded under an outdated territorial procedure and was therefore not legally binding under the current code. It was Clara recognized immediately a narrow argument. Not frivolous enough to dismiss outright, but narrow. She set the document on the table. This filing, she said, argues that a right-of-way agreement in continuous use for 11 years is invalid because of a procedural question about its original recording. She looked at Harrison. Is the court prepared to void 11 years of established practice on the basis of a procedural technicality? The court is prepared to review. Because if the court voids this agreement, she said, cutting through him cleanly, it will be doing so in the middle of an active federal commission inquiry into the pattern of land acquisitions in this valley. And the timing of that voiding will be part of the record of that inquiry. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. I want to make sure the court understands that. Harrison stared at her. Across the room, Nathan's lawyer had gone very still. Nathan himself was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the careful smile, not the performed patience. Something rawer than that. The face of a man who had just understood that the game he was playing had changed while he wasn't watching. The court, Harrison said slowly, is not aware of any active federal inquiry. It will be within the hour? Clara said. If it isn't already. She stood. She picked up the filing and set it back on Harrison's table. I would ask the court to delay any action on this filing until the commission has formally opened. That's a reasonable request that any territorial court would grant under these circumstances. She looked at Harrison directly. Wouldn't you agree, Judge? A long pause. Harrison looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the floor. The court will take the matter under advisement, Harrison said. Thank you. She turned. Good afternoon, gentlemen. She walked out. Caleb held the door. Outside in the sharp noon light, she exhaled once fully, and then she kept walking, and he walked beside her, and they didn't speak until they were at their horses. Under advisement, he said. He'll sit on it until the commission formally opens, she said. At which point, Nathan's lawyer will know there's no local maneuver left to make. She untied her horse. We just shut the last door. Caleb looked back at the courthouse. Nathan's not going to take that quietly. No. She mounted. He's going to be angry. And angry men make mistakes. They rode. The mistake came that afternoon. It came in the form of a story. By 2 o'clock, Clara was aware that something was moving through town because Eli came back from the feed store with his jaw tight, and his eyes carrying the specific expression of someone who has heard something unpleasant and is trying to figure out how to deliver it. What? She said. People are talking, Eli said. In town. Saying things. What things? He looked at Caleb, then back at her. Saying that Dawson came here for the ranch, that he knew about the property value before the marriage, that he and you were, that the two of you had some kind of arrangement before the sheriff died. He stopped. I know it's not true. I just thought you should know what they're saying. Clara's hands went still on the fence rail she'd been holding. Who's saying it? Caleb said. His voice was very even. Cross was at the feed store. He wasn't saying it directly. He was letting other people say it while he stood there. Denny Cross. Nathan's man. In the feed store planting a story. Clara looked at Caleb. He was looking at the gate, and his jaw was tight, and she could see him working through something. Then he turned, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't fully seen from him before. Not anger, not exactly, but something close to it. Something that had been compressed for a long time and was pressing against the surface. He's trying to discredit you before the commission opens, Caleb said. Before the commission opens, we're just a widow and a drifter, she said. After it opens, we're witnesses. Right now, discrediting us costs Nathan nothing. I should go to town. No. She said it firmly. That's exactly what Nathan wants. He wants you to go into town and react. He wants something that looks like guilt or aggression that he can point to. She held his gaze. You're going to stay here. We're both going to stay here. Caleb's jaw worked. And just let them say it. For now. Clara. Caleb. She said his name with enough weight that he stopped. The commission opens tomorrow. That's 18 hours. In 18 hours, none of this will matter because everything will be in federal hands. And Nathan's pattern will be on record, and whatever story he's trying to tell about us will be next to a documented record of 6 years of fraud and a sheriff's murder. She held his gaze. 18 hours. He was quiet for a long moment. I have heard that story before, he said, very quietly. Not to her, not quite. About myself, that I came for what I could get, that I wasn't what I said I was. She understood immediately. Wyoming, Billings, Nathan Cole's father, and the property, and James Rourke. I know, she said. Hearing it again, he stopped. I know. She moved toward him, and she did something she hadn't done before in daylight without the cover of a barn in a storm. She put her hand on his arm, just that. Just the weight of her hand, the same way she'd placed it against his face on Saturday night. I know exactly what it sounds like, and I know what it feels like, and I know it's a lie. The people on this ranch know it's a lie. Briggs knows. Finn knows. She kept her eyes on his. In 18 hours, the whole territory will know. He looked at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his. She let him. 18 hours, he said. 18 hours. The 18th hour arrived in the form of Nathan Cole himself. He came at 7 in the evening, and he came alone, which was the first thing that told Clara this was different from the other visits. Cross wasn't with him. The usual 2 men weren't behind him. He rode up to the gate alone, and he called out for her, not Cross's version of calling. Not the loud performative demand, just her name once, with something underneath it that she hadn't heard from him before. She came out. Caleb came to the doorway, and she held up her hand without looking back, and he stopped there in the doorframe where Nathan could see him, but he wasn't standing between them. She made sure of that, specifically. Nathan dismounted. He held his horse's reins, and he looked at her across the yard, and what she saw in his face was not what she expected. It was not anger. It was not the careful smile. It was something stripped back and honest in a way she had not once seen from him. "I got the subpoena," he said. "I know." "The commission." He paused. "Aldridge personally signed it." "I know that too." He looked at her for a long moment. "It was you." "It was William," she said. "I finished what William started." Something moved across Nathan's face, at that she couldn't name it fully, but it had weight in it, the kind of weight that doesn't come from a single thing, but from the accumulated pressure of a great many things over a long time. "What do you want from this, Clara?" He said her first name, and for the first time, it wasn't the practiced familiarity of a man trying to create an impression of closeness. It sounded like a real question. "The ranch. You have the ranch. The inquiry can't touch your property." "I want it to stop," she said. "I want every rancher in this valley to be able to keep what they've built without someone with money and lawyers and hired men picking it apart. I want the families that Nathan Cole that you forced out to have something on the record that says what happened to them was wrong." She paused. "And I want whoever arranged what happened to my husband to be accountable for it." The yard was completely silent. Nathan's hand tightened on the reins. "I didn't order that," he said. Clara looked at him. "I want you to hear me say it," he said. "Whatever the inquiry finds about the land, I won't fight what's true. But I didn't order William to be shot." She held his gaze for a long time. She was looking for the lie the way you look for it in a person's face when the words are exactly what you want to hear. She looked for the performance, the calculation, the shaped-for-purpose expression. She didn't find it. What she found was more complicated and less satisfying. The face of a man who had done a great deal of wrong and knew it, and was drawing a line at the one wrong that was worse than all the others. "Then who did?" she said. He looked away, just briefly, then back. "I don't know. I think someone made a decision I didn't make. Someone who thought they were helping me." He paused. "I've been trying to find out for 6 months." Something moved through Clara's chest. Not relief, not quite, but the specific ache of a truth that is more complicated than the one you were carrying. She had been so certain. She had built the whole structure of what she'd set in motion on the foundation of Nathan being responsible for William's death, and now he was standing in her yard telling her that he might not be, and the ground was shifting under her feet. She breathed. She thought about Caleb behind her in the doorway. She thought about Finn's affidavit. 12 pages. The map. She thought about William. "You're going to cooperate with the commission," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her. He looked at the house behind her where Caleb was standing. He looked at the ranch, the land, the cattle moving in the distance, the fence lines and the river access, and all the acres he had been building toward for 6 years. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. "Then go home, Nathan." He stood there for another moment. He looked like he might say something else. Then he turned, and he mounted, and he rode out. Clara stood in the yard until the sound of the hooves faded. Then she turned. Caleb was still in the doorway. He had heard all of it. She could see that in his face, not the words maybe, but the shape of what had happened, the unexpected turn that had left the ground less solid than it had been. "He didn't order it," she said. "I heard." She walked toward the house toward him. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him. "Then someone else did," she said. "Someone who thought they were helping Nathan and moved independently." She pressed her hand against the porch rail. "The inquiry is going to have to go deeper than Nathan's land records." "It will," Caleb said. "With a federal commission and a cooperating primary witness, it will." She nodded. She looked at him. There was something in the space between them, and it was not comfortable, and it was not resolved. It was the acknowledgement that the work was not finished. That finished was further than they had thought, past the shape of Nathan Cole, that they'd been building toward into something larger and less defined. "James," she said quietly, "his death. Nathan may not know who arranged it either." Caleb's face went very still. "No," he said, "he may not." She held his gaze. She understood what she was looking at: a man who had built 6 years of purpose around a single answer and had just been told the answer might be one step further than he could reach right now. She understood it because she was standing inside her own version of the same thing. "We're not done," she said. "No, but we're not starting from the beginning either." She put her foot on the bottom step. "We have Nathan cooperating. We have the commission. We have Finn and the affidavit and 12 pages and a map." She looked up at him. "We have more than William had when he died." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "We have more than I had when I came here," he said. She heard what that meant. All of it, the layers in it, the things it encompassed beyond the investigation, beyond Nathan and the ranch and the federal commission. She climbed the steps. She stopped in front of him, one step below, so they were nearly eye to eye. "Roy Finn told me William said someone would come to find the truth," she said. "He said to make sure they found him." She looked at Caleb directly. "When William said that, do you think he knew it would be you?" Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Something worked through his face that she felt more than she could see, something old and heavy and just beginning to be set down. "No," he said. "I don't think he knew it would be me." "I do," she said. And she walked past him into the house. She heard him stand there for a moment. Then she heard his footsteps behind her, and something in her chest, that thing that had stopped bracing against itself on a storm-soaked Saturday night in a barn, moved another inch toward open. Monday morning, the Federal Commission formally opened its inquiry into Nathan Cole and associated land transactions in the Red Valley District of Montana Territory. Aldridge arrived from Helena himself, which Briggs told them later was unprecedented, a sign of how seriously the commission was taking what they'd been given. He came with 2 deputies and a stenographer and a complete set of territorial land records pulled from the Helena archive, and he set up in the courthouse with Harrison very pointedly not invited to participate. Clara and Caleb gave their testimony that morning. She had expected it to feel different. She had expected the formality of it, the oath, the formal questions, the stenographer's pen moving across the page to feel like a conclusion, like the moment she'd been building toward. Instead, it felt like the opening of something. Like the moment a door you've been pushing against finally gives, and what's behind it is not a room, but a hallway, and the hallway goes further than you can see. She told Aldridge everything in sequence in the steady, detailed voice she had been saving up for exactly this moment. She told him about William's investigation, about Roy Finn, about the 12 pages, and the map, and the diner on a Tuesday morning, and everything Nathan Cole had built across 6 years and 7 properties and 1 terrible night at a grain depot. She told him about James Rourke. When she mentioned James, Caleb's breathing changed beside her. She heard it just barely. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Aldridge and kept her voice even and said everything that needed to be said about a man who had disappeared into Nathan Cole's father's land and had never come out. When she finished, Aldridge was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "your husband assembled an impressive foundation." "He did," she said. "And you completed it." She thought about that. She thought about 12 pages written at a kitchen table at midnight with a man who didn't sleep well sitting across from her. She thought about a Tuesday morning at a diner and a hand pressed flat against a door in a storm and a courthouse where she had walked out in gray instead of black and everything that had come after. "We completed it," she said. She felt Caleb go still beside her. She didn't look at him, but she heard him exhale slow and even, and she knew what it sounded like. It sounded like something being set down. The commission inquiry lasted 11 days. 11 days of depositions and document reviews and formally recorded testimonies that built on each other the way a wall builds one layer at a time, each one making the next more solid. Aldridge ran it with the methodical patience of a man who had learned that rushed justice is no justice at all. And Clara watched the process from the inside and understood for the first time why William had been so careful about building the case right rather than building it fast. Because when you build it right, it holds. Nathan produced his official ledgers on the second day, accompanied by his lawyer and a formal statement of cooperation. Aldridge accepted both without comment and set his deputies to cross-referencing every entry against the territorial land records from Helena. Clara was not in the room for that part, but Briggs was in his official capacity as court recorder, and he told her that evening that Nathan had sat through the entire review with the expression of a man who had already accepted the arithmetic. On the fourth day, something happened that none of them had anticipated. Roy Finn came in voluntarily, not summoned, not pressured, but on his own feet with his leather case under his arm and his gray mustache carefully trimmed, and he asked to add to his sworn statement. He told Aldridge he wanted to describe in precise detail the contents of the secondary ledger. Not from a copy, from memory. Because Roy Finn, as it turned out, had the specific gift of a man who had spent 30 years keeping meticulous records. He remembered numbers the way other people remembered faces. He spent 4 hours reconstructing the secondary ledger from memory. Every payment, every date, every amount, every notation Nathan had made in his own hand alongside the figures. When he finished, the room was completely silent for a long moment. Then, Aldridge said quietly, "Mr. Finn, that may be the most significant single testimony this commission has ever received." Finn straightened slightly in his chair. He picked up his leather case. "The sheriff was a good man," he said. "I've been owing him something for a long time." Clara heard about it from Briggs that evening. She sat at the kitchen table and she listened, and when Briggs finished, she folded her hands on the table and she looked at them for a long moment without speaking. "Roy Finn remembered all of it," she said finally. "All of it," Briggs confirmed. She nodded slowly. Caleb was across the table. He had been listening with his usual quality of complete attention, the kind that didn't require comment, that simply took everything in and held it. After Briggs left, they sat in the kitchen, and the lamp burned between them, and neither of them spoke for a while. "James is in those records," Caleb said finally. "He will be," she said, "when they cross-reference the dates and amounts against the Wyoming properties. He'll be there." His voice was very flat, very controlled in the way voices go when the feeling underneath is too large for the words available. "After 6 years, he'll be there." Clara looked at him. She did not offer comfort because she understood that this was not a moment for comfort. This was the moment when something that had been held in suspension for 6 years was beginning to resolve. And resolution is not the same as relief, and she knew that better than most people in the world right now. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that until the lamp burned low. Dear. On the 7th day, the commission found the man they had not been looking for. His name was Gerald Marsh, and he was not Nathan Cole's man. He was Denny Cross's cousin, a hired hand who had worked the grain depot the night William was shot, and who had, according to the cross-referenced payment records from Finn's reconstructed ledger, received a significant cash payment 2 days after William Whitmore's death. The payment was not from Nathan Cole's account. It was from Cross's personal funds, which had been, according to further investigation, significantly supplemented by a wire transfer from a third party. Not Nathan, not anyone connected to Nathan's primary operation, but a man named Silas Grant, who was a silent investor in 2 of Nathan's earlier land deals, and who had decided, without Nathan's knowledge or authorization, that the problem of Sheriff William Whitmore needed to be resolved before Nathan's plans could proceed. Cross had acted on Grant's money, Grant had acted on what he believed Nathan wanted. Nathan had not ordered it, had not known it was being arranged, and had spent the past 6 months trying to trace it, because he had understood with the particular cold clarity of a man who knows how these things work, that whatever he had or hadn't done, if a sheriff died near his operation and the trail ever got fully followed, it would lead back to him regardless of who had actually given the order. He had been right. Aldridge brought Nathan in for a separate interview on the 8th day. Clara was not in the room for that one either. But Aldridge told her afterward in a private conversation in Briggs's office that Nathan Cole had provided the names of Grant and Cross and every link in the chain with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had decided that cooperation was the only card he had left. He knew, Aldridge said. He'd traced most of it himself. He just hadn't taken it anywhere because taking it anywhere meant exposing everything else. Clara absorbed this. "What happens to him?" she asked. Cole, Aldridge pressed his lips together. "The land fraud charges are significant. Several of the property transfers will be reviewed and potentially reversed. He'll face territorial charges and likely federal ones. He won't keep most of what he's built." A pause. "But he didn't order the murder. That matters legally." "And Cross and Grant?" "That," Aldridge said quietly, "is a different matter entirely." She held his gaze. "William," she said. "Just the word." "We'll have justice," Aldridge said. "Full and formal and on the record. I promise you that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. She stood. She walked out of Briggs's office into the afternoon light, and she stood there, and she breathed, and she did something she had not done since the morning they buried William. She let herself cry, not visibly, not with any drama, just her eyes filling, and the tears running down her face in the bright afternoon, and her breathing going unsteady for exactly 1 minute, while the town of Red Valley moved around her without paying particular attention. 1 minute. Then she wiped her face. She straightened her coat. She walked to where her horse was tied, and she rode home. What? Caleb was at the north fence when she rode in. He saw her face before she said a word. She knew he did, because he dropped what he was doing and came toward her without hesitation. "They found who did it," she said. She told him. All of it. Cross and Grant and the wire transfer and Silas Grant's decision made without Nathan's knowledge and the specific terrible ordinary way in which William had died, not as the central obstacle in a large scheme, but as a problem solved by two men acting on greed and assumption without ever once considering what they were actually ending. Caleb stood and listened, and his face went through several things in sequence recognition. Then something colder and harder. Then something that was the opposite of cold, something too raw to be properly named. When she finished, he looked at the ground for a moment. "Cross," he said, "and Grant, both facing murder charges. Aldridge is handling the arrest personally." He nodded. He kept looking at the ground. "James," she said quietly. "Caleb, the payments in the Wyoming ledger. Aldridge is going to pursue that thread. Grant's operation goes back further than Red Valley. If there's a record, I know." He looked up. His eyes were very dark and very direct, and there was something in them that she recognized as the look a person has when they have been carrying a weight for so long that the prospect of putting it down feels less like relief and more like learning to walk differently. "I know." She looked at him. "It's not finished," she said. "Not all of it. The charges, the hearings, the property reviews, it's going to take months. And James may never be fully answered," he said. "I know that too." He held her gaze. "I've known it for 6 years. That some things don't get the ending you needed. That sometimes the best you get is enough evidence to know what happened without enough left to hold the full weight of it." She held his gaze. "Is that enough?" she asked, not testing him, genuinely asking. He was quiet for a long moment. "It's more than I had 3 months ago," he said. "And 3 months ago I didn't have—" He stopped. "What?" she said, quietly. He looked at her. The afternoon light was behind her, and he was looking at her with an expression she had no comfortable category for something that had been building in increments since a courthouse and a gray dress, and the words, I won't take anything from you that you don't willingly give, and had arrived here at its full weight. You, he said simply. 3 months ago I didn't have you. The yard was very still. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she could say about William, about grief, about the complicated arithmetic of a heart that has loved and lost and is only beginning to understand what it might be capable of next. She thought about 18 hours and a storm and a tack room and her hand against his jaw. She thought about what it meant to choose something, not because a law required it, not because circumstances had arranged it, but because you looked at a person and you saw them, the whole shape of them, the scars and the steadiness and the losses they'd turned into purpose, and you chose them with your eyes open. I know, she said, and she stepped toward him. He met her halfway. This kiss was different from the first one. The first one had been a question, tentative and half-formed, the kind of thing you do in the dark when you're not yet sure what you're saying. This one was an answer, unhurried and clear in full afternoon light, with the ranch around them, and the work unfinished, and the months ahead still complicated and uncertain, and all of that present and accounted for and chosen anyway. When she stepped back, she looked at him. His face had done something she had not seen it do before. Not the almost smile she'd catalogued in the early weeks. Something fuller than that. Something that changed the whole landscape of him. All right, he said. The same word she'd said to him in the barn, carrying the same weight. All right, she agreed. Eli appeared around the corner of the barn, took one look at the two of them, turned directly around, and disappeared back the way he'd come. Clara looked in the direction Eli had gone. He's going to tell Hector, she said. Probably already has. Caleb glanced toward the barn. The corner of his mouth moved in that way it had the thing that was earlier than a smile, and somehow more honest. Hector owes Eli $2. She looked at him. They were betting on us. Since about the 3rd week. He looked entirely unbothered by this. Hector thought it would take longer. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It surprised her. The laugh, the full real weight of it coming up from somewhere. It had been stored since before William died, since before all of it, from a place that had been waiting for the right moment to open. She pressed her hand over her mouth, and the laugh came through anyway, and she heard Caleb's voice underneath it, low and warm. Not a full laugh, but something in its neighborhood. When it passed, she felt lighter, not empty, not like something had been removed, like something had been rearranged to fit better. She looked at him. Come on, she said. There's still 2 hours of daylight. He fell into step beside her. The formal commission report was released 4 weeks later. It was 43 pages, and it was thorough, and it documented in precise, unremarkable legal language the full scope of what Nathan Cole had done across 6 years. The property transfers, the coerced sales, the pattern of intimidation and manufactured legal challenges that had stripped 11 families of land they had built and intended to keep. It documented the role of Gerald Marsh Denny Cross and Silas Grant in the death of Sheriff William James Whitmore. It documented the Wyoming properties and the events involving James Rourke. And while James's death could not be legally proven beyond the threshold required for a murder charge, the record established clearly and permanently what had happened to him and who had benefited from it. It named names, all of them. Grant and Cross were arrested by federal deputies and held for trial. Nathan Cole entered a formal cooperation agreement and faced a hearing before the territorial court on the land fraud charges, and the outcome of that hearing resulted in the reversal of 3 property transfers and the beginning of a compensation process for the families involved. It was not everything. It was more than nothing. It was, as Briggs said to Clara on the morning the report was released, more than this valley had ever gotten from anything before. William would have wanted it done right, Briggs said. He did want it done right, Clara said. That's why it took this long. Briggs looked at her across his desk. He had the expression he'd had on the day they'd first brought him the 12 pages, something on the far side of guilt in the territory where guilt resolves into something a person can live with. The town is talking about you differently now, he said. I know. They were wrong about you, from the beginning. Some of them. She stood. Some of them were scared. Some of them were just watching. That's usually how it goes. And Dawson. She picked up her coat. What about him? Briggs allowed himself the smallest possible version of a smile. The town is talking about him differently too. She put her coat on. Good, she said. He's earned it. She left. Yeah, the months that followed were the kind of months you don't write down because they're not the kind of thing that makes a story. They're the kind of thing that makes a life. The ranch expanded. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the steady way that good operations grow when they're properly run and properly resourced. An additional 30 acres along the river frontage they'd secured through the right-of-way confirmation. A new water routing system that added grazing land. 2 new ranch hands who came recommended by families whose properties had been protected by the commission's findings. Clara ran it all. Caleb ran it with her. The distinction mattered to them both, not as a correction of anything, but as an affirmation. She was the architect. He was the builder. They were not interchangeable, and they did not try to be, and that was precisely why it worked. Eli became a foreman by autumn, a development that would have seemed improbable to anyone who had known him at the start of the year. He still said stupid things at supper, but less often, and when he did, he was more likely to catch himself. Hector never changed. Hector was the kind of man who had already arrived at himself and had no intention of going anywhere else. Clara valued that enormously. Roy Finn left Nathan's employment in September and set up as an independent bookkeeper in Red Valley. He had more clients in 3 months than he could comfortably manage. Clara was one of them. She trusted his numbers completely, which was the highest compliment she knew how to give. Tom Briggs retired his position as court recorder in October, not under pressure, but by choice, and he told Clara over coffee one morning that he had been thinking about it for 2 years, but hadn't been able to leave while something was unfinished. She told him he'd done well. He told her William would have been proud of her. She said that was 2 separate things, and both of them were probably true. The night before the anniversary of William's death, Clara sat alone on the porch in the dark. She did this deliberately. She had thought about it for a week in advance, had cleared the evening, had sent Caleb to check the east pasture, on a task that did not genuinely require him to be gone, but that she needed him to be gone for, because there are things you need to do alone, and this was one of them. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she thought about William. She thought about all of it. The 8 years, the Sunday mornings at the diner, the way he'd held his coffee cup with both hands, even in summer. The way he had looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, which was the way she had learned what it looked like for a person to see you fully. She thought about the chair facing east, where she had sat in the days after he died, trying to memorize a smell. She thought about what he had said to Roy Finn 6 months before he died. Someone will come to find the truth. Make sure they find you. And she understood now, sitting on the porch in the dark, that William had known something she hadn't. He had understood that he might not finish what he'd started. And instead of stopping, he had kept building and had made sure the pieces were in place for someone else to complete it. He had trusted that someone would come, and someone had. She sat with all of that for a long time. She let it be heavy, and then she let it be lighter, not because the weight had changed, but because she had gotten stronger and the ratio had shifted. That was what grief did. She had learned when you moved through it instead of around it. It didn't get smaller, you got larger, and eventually you could carry it without it being all you were carrying. She heard footsteps on the porch. She didn't turn. Caleb sat down in the chair beside her. Not William's chair, the other one. He had always, without ever discussing it, chosen the other one. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either. They sat in the dark together, and the valley spread out in front of them the way it always did at night. The grass moving in the low wind, the stars very large and very clear, the way they only were out here, away from the lights of things. And Clara felt both things at once. The way she had learned she could, the loss and the presence, the grief and the gratitude, the love that had ended, and the love that was beginning, both of them, real. Both of them, hers. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said finally. "In the tack room the night of the storm. That I wasn't nothing to you." He waited. "I want you to know that was the right thing to say." She looked at her hands. "Not because it started something, but because it was honest. And I had not had a lot of honesty in those first weeks." "You had your own honesty," he said. "You were the most honest person in any room. About the ranch, about Nathan." She paused. "About other things I was still figuring out what was true. And now—" She turned and looked at him in the dark. "Now I know," she said. He looked at her. His face in the dark was the honest face, the one underneath the others, the one she had learned to see. "Clara," he said. "I know the timing is not conventional," she said. "I know that some people in this town are still watching. I know that what we have started from an arrangement that nobody would have chosen and has become something that—" She stopped. She started again. "You are the most honest person I have found since William. And you came here for the right reasons, and you stayed for the right reasons, and every day since you got here, you have been exactly who you said you were." She held his gaze. "Do you know how rare that is?" He held very still. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know that about myself. I have opinions about everything, and I don't give way easily, and I will always run my own ranch my own way, and you would be choosing a life that is already built, and that you would be joining rather than building from scratch." "I know all of that," he said. And I chose it the morning I walked into that courthouse." He looked at her steadily. "And I've kept choosing it every day since, and I would like to keep choosing it." She looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through the grass below the porch. "Then stay," she said. "Not as a condition, not as a concession. As what it was, the clearest, most unencumbered thing she had said to another person in a very long time." He held her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She reached over and she took his hand. He held it. They sat like that as the night settled around them in the quiet that had become the best kind of language between them, the kind that didn't need filling, that was already full of everything that mattered. Below them, the valley spread out dark and silver and wide, the river catching starlight somewhere in the distance, the land she had fought for and kept laid out in the dark, like a promise that had been made good. Red Valley would remember what had happened that year for a long time. They would tell the story of the Federal Commission and the land fraud and the justice that had come late but had come fully. They would talk about Roy Finn and his impossible memory, and Tom Briggs, and the private courier, and Aldridge arriving from Helena in person with his deputies and his stenographer. They would talk about the widow and the cowboy, and some of them in telling it would get it slightly wrong, would say she had needed saving, would say he had rescued her, would tell it as the story of a man who came to the right place at the right time and fixed what was broken. But the people who had been there, who had watched it from the inside, Briggs and Finn and Eli and Hector and Aldridge in his report, and the families who got their land back, they knew the true version. The true version was this: a woman who refused to be reduced, who turned grief into action and loss into purpose, and a forced arrangement into the most honest partnership the Valley had ever seen. A man who had been carrying a dead friend in a cold case across 6 years of open country and had finally found the place where it resolved not into the ending he'd been hoping for, but into something better and more real than the ending, into a life he had stopped believing was available to him. Two people who had been given nothing and had built everything. Clara Whitmore had walked into a courthouse in a gray dress with her spine straight and her face still and her hands steady, and she had refused in every way that mattered to be anything less than exactly who she was. And that refusal had been the beginning of all of it. The beginning of the case, and the justice and the truth about William, and the slow, unplanned, entirely real love that had grown up in the space between two people who had needed each other before they knew it. She sat on her porch, with Caleb Dawson's hand in hers, and the stars above the Montana Valley, very clear and very close. And she was not the sheriff's widow, and he was not the lonely cowboy. And they were not a miserable match or a forced arrangement or a cautionary tale. They were exactly what they had made themselves through work and honesty and the stubborn refusal to let the worst things win. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.